2 years ago today, on October 11, 2021, the Norwegian Supreme Court delivered a landmark ruling against the Norwegian government, citing violations of the UN Convention on Civil and Political Rights. The court's decision was a beacon of hope and a wake-up call, reminding us of the critical importance of upholding human rights, even in the face of economic and industrial progress. This ruling was not just about windmills. It was about the lives and well-being of vulnerable communities who often bear the brunt of such decisions. It was about recognizing that the right to a clean and healthy environment is a fundamental human right, one that must be respected and protected. Yet the irony of the situation is stark. Despite the Supreme Court's ruling, the very windmills deemed to be infringing upon these rights continue to operate. The question then is not about the legality of the ruling, but rather its effective enforcement. But despite this groundbreaking ruling, the windmills, the very subject of this case, remain in operation today. In response to the court's ruling, the Norwegian government has justified its decision to keep the windmills operational. The rationale, the benefits of renewable energy and economic stability. But let's take a moment here. Imagine a child, hand caught in the cookie jar. They've been told not to, yet they argue it's for the best. The cookies are delicious and they're hungry. Sounds absurd, right? Well, that's the situation here. The government caught red-handed, violating human rights, yet justifying it for the supposed greater good. But here's the catch. The greater good often leaves out those who need the most protection, the most vulnerable populations, the indigenous communities, the marginalized, the unheard. They bear the brunt of these decisions, their rights sacrificed at the altar of progress. Such justifications, however, can have dire consequences for the most vulnerable among us, and that's a cost we simply cannot afford. On the international stage, Norway has long been a respected advocate for human rights. This Scandinavian nation has consistently championed the cause of equality, freedom, and dignity for all. Its commitment to these principles is evident in its active role in international forums and its robust support for human rights initiatives worldwide. But let's not forget that human rights are not just an international issue. They are universal, applying to everyone, everywhere. This includes the vulnerable populations within Norway's own borders. These individuals, communities, and groups often look to their government, to Norway, as a beacon of human rights, a model of fairness and justice. Yet the continued operation of the Fosen windmills, despite a Supreme Court ruling that they violate the UN Convention on Civil and Political Rights, casts a shadow over Norway's shining reputation. It paints a picture of a nation that prioritizes certain interests over the rights of its most vulnerable citizens. But the question arises, is Norway practicing what it preaches? The risk of hypocrisy looms large for Norway. A country that prides itself on being a champion of human rights on the global stage, Norway now faces a profound contradiction. When a nation publicly advocates for human rights internationally, yet falls short in upholding these very same rights within its own borders, it risks appearing hypocritical. This is not just about reputation. The consequences run far deeper. It's about the trust and hope that vulnerable populations worldwide place in countries like Norway. These communities look towards these nations as beacons of human rights, as their defenders in a world often indifferent to their plight. When these defenders falter, it shakes the faith of these vulnerable communities. It undermines their trust and diminishes their hope. It sends a message that their rights might be secondary to other considerations, even in countries held up as exemplars of human rights. This paradoxical situation poses a critical question about the consistent respect for human rights. It seems we are caught in a paradox. A nation celebrated for championing human rights on the global stage, yet struggles to uphold the same principles within its own borders. 2 years ago, the Norwegian Supreme Court ruled against its own government for violating the UN Convention on Civil and Political Rights. Yet the windmills still turn, a stark reminder of the ruling that was and the action that wasn't. This paradoxical situation has far-reaching implications, particularly for the most vulnerable. When a beacon of human rights fails to shine at home, it casts a long shadow on the hope and trust that vulnerable populations place in such institutions. Consistency is key. Human rights must be respected, not just in international forums, but also within our own borders. The most vulnerable among us deserve no less. The respect for human rights, particularly for those most in need, is not just an international obligation but also a domestic necessity.